So, since my last video, quite a bit has happened. We've gotten responses from 2080 Games. Ghosts of Tabor has cut their ties with Tactical Assault VR, and I've spoken directly with one of the game's developers. There's also been a lot of misinformation spreading throughout the community. After my first video, I reached out directly to Puddle because one of the biggest questions people were asking wasn't even about Jarvis anymore. It was, what's going to happen to Tactical Assault VR? Instead of guessing, I decided to go ahead and ask somebody who was actually involved in that process. According to Puddle, discussions had already taken place about transferring ownership of the game. This happened earlier today. When I asked how those discussions went, he explained that they had spoken about the transfer and were planning to continue those discussions later in the week after Kanto also had his chance to talk to him. He also said they're hoping to have everything finalized before the end of this week. I then asked if there was anything the community could be told because people were understandably worried that the game was simply going to disappear from the store. Puddle replied with this: "You can share that I believe we have a proposal on the table that would work for everybody to keep the game going." He then followed up by saying, "Jarvis and I are up for it, and I don't foresee Kanto having any objections either." I do want to be careful with how I present this. This is not confirmation that the ownership has already changed. This is not an announcement that a deal has already been completed. This is simply what Puddle shared with me about what Jarvis and him discussed so far. What this does tell us is that discussions were actively happening. Now, let's go ahead and backtrack a bit and talk about the original case. Over the last several days, I've seen a lot of claims repeated online through TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and all other platforms. Some of them have been accurate, but a lot of them actually aren't. So instead of repeating what these people are saying, let's look at what actually has been reported. According to the Las Vegas Review Journal, in July of 2020, Jarvis was arrested during a FBI child exploitation task force operation. According to the article, an undercover officer posed online as someone offering sex for money and told the people responding that the person was 15 years old. The article reports that Jarvis initially expressed concern about the person's age, but continued the conversation and later arrived at the agreed meeting location in a church parking lot. There was never an actual 15-year-old involved, it was an undercover police officer. However, according to the arrest report described by the newspaper, he believed he was communicating with someone who was 15. The journal reported that he was initially arrested on suspicion of soliciting a child for prostitution and for luring a child to engage in a sexual act. Later reporting based on Clark County court records states that Jarvis pleaded guilty to a gross misdemeanor charge of conspiracy to solicit or engage in prostitution. According to that reporting, he received probation and was required to register as a Tier 2 sex offender during that probation. The report also states that his probation was completed in August of 2022. That timeline is important because there's a difference between what someone is initially arrested on and what the reported legal outcome ultimately was. My goal isn't to make the situation sound better or worse than it was. I simply want it to be accurate because I've been seeing people say that he was arrested for human trafficking and all sorts of other stuff. And when we muddy the waters like that, it starts messing up the facts. So the next thing I want to talk about is something that's actually been affecting me ever since this information became public. The conversation was very quickly stopped about what actually happened. Instead, it became about repeating whatever version of the story people heard first. As more people get involved, details start changing, rumors spread, screenshots are taken out of context, and long before, people aren't even arguing about facts anymore. They're arguing about different versions of the same story. And that's where the biggest problem started. Because misinformation was being corrected by myself and others, people immediately started accusing anyone who did so of defending a pedophile, specifically me. I've been called multiple times by multiple people that I am defending a pedophile. Not just me, members of the Tactical Assault VR staff team, other community members, people who had absolutely nothing to do with Jarvis's actions, simply because we were correcting something that wasn't accurate. I want everyone watching this to really think about that for a second. These are not small insults. These are incredibly serious accusations. I also want to mention the staff again. The staff did not cause this. One thing that really bothered me throughout all of this is that people are directing their anger towards the developers and the staff members who either didn't know or were actively helping me get this information. According to the Ghosts of Tabor's public statement, the remaining Tactical Assault VR team only learned about this situation that same morning. And that's true. The Ghost of War even asked people not to direct their anger towards the development team or their families. Think about that. Another studio had to publicly tell people to stop harassing developers who weren't responsible for what happened. And the worst part is, it really didn't even do anything because people still came into the server and started harassing them. I understand why people are angry. This is a very serious situation. People should be asking questions. People should be wanting accountability. But there's a difference between accountability and a mob. The moment people start attacking anyone who asks for accuracy or correcting misinformation, the conversation stops becoming about accountability and becomes about finding new people to blame and moves further from what the original point was. So, getting back on topic with new information, after this information became public, 2080 Games released a statement of their own. In that statement, the company said it had only recently become aware of the developer's past and had decided to terminate its publishing agreement with both the developer and a Tactical Assault VR. In simple terms, their business relationship with Tactical Assault VR is over. I think it means it's important to explain because we've been seeing a lot of confusion online. 2080 Games was the publisher. It is not part of the development team and has no influence over them. Ending the publishing agreement means 2080 Games is no longer involved in the publishment of promotional material for Tactical Assault VR. It doesn't mean they controlled whether the game continues to exist. It didn't mean they controlled future updates. And it does not mean that they're making decisions about where the project goes from here. Before that public statement, I had actually already contacted 2080 Games directly, as I explained in a previous video. And to their credit, they did respond to me. However, in their email, they told me they had only recently become aware of the past incident involving Jarvis and had made the decision to terminate their publishing agreement. And while I appreciate they responded, their email did not answer any of the questions I asked. And when I responded further asking them to, I've still not gotten a response. From everything we've been shown, the goal is to keep Tactical Assault VR alive under a new ownership structure. What this means going forward is that 2080 Games will no longer be involved. Ghosts of Tabor, at least for the moment, is no longer involved, and the game will still be receiving updates. Matter of fact, it just had a, I believe, 2 gigabyte update that added a new mode and adjusted some things. And according to Puddle, the conversations will be happening still. So when people ask, is Tactical Assault VR dead? The answer is no. The business relationships have changed, but the development is still ongoing. They just need to stamp out details before continuing. So I want to end this video by saying something that I think has gotten lost over the past few days. You don't have to exaggerate the facts to condemn someone's actions. The truth is enough. If someone has done something serious, let the documented facts speak for themselves. The moment we start adding rumors, changing the details, or attacking anybody who asks for accuracy, we stop helping the conversation and spreading what happened, and we make it harder for people to trust the legitimate information, and these innocent people get caught in the crossfire. I've been called a fucking pedophile defender. Members of the Tactical Assault VR staff team have been called pedophile defenders. Other members of the community have been called pedophile defenders. Not because any one of us defended Jarvis, and not because anybody excused what happened, but because we were correcting misinformation. This should never become the fucking normal. If we're going to hold people accountable, and we should, we have to be responsible for the information we spread. These two things should go hand in hand. So, moving forward, I'm going to be continuing covering this story if new information comes out, if any ownership changes, if 2080 Games answers my remaining questions, which I doubt they will, or if there's another official update regarding Tactical Assault VR, I'll cover it. But I'm only going to cover information that can actually be supported. Not rumors, not misinformation, not assumptions, not a TikTok video saying some random fucking bullshit, and not gossip, just the facts that I can confirm. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you found this update helpful, consider subscribing so you don't miss future updates. I'm hoping to have part 3 out by the end of the week. And one last time, do not harass anyone mentioned in the video. Hold the right people accountable, respect the facts, and let the truth speak for itself. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you on the next one.